Let's talk about power. I mean, real power. Today, we're digging into the story of Wu Zetian, the one and only woman to ever rule China as emperor. Her story is just this incredible mix of pure genius, shocking brutality, and just sheer force of will. We're talking about a climb from the very bottom of the imperial harem, a place of beautiful cages and hidden daggers, to the absolute peak of power, a position no woman had ever held before or has ever held since. And that right there, that wasn't some clever metaphor about a horse. Nope. That was her entire philosophy on life, on power, on control. A simple three-step plan. First, try discipline. If that doesn't work, use brute force. And if it's still a problem, eliminate it. It is an absolutely chilling window into the mind of a woman who would let nothing and no one get in her way. So, who was she really? Because history gives us two totally different versions. On one side, she's this bloodthirsty tyrant, a monster who supposedly murdered her own children just to get ahead. But then, on the other side, she's seen as this brilliant, effective ruler who brought peace and prosperity to China. So which is it? Can both be true? Well, let's get into it. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to break down her story into 5 parts. We'll look at her complicated legacy, track her insane climb to power, follow the trail of blood she left behind, see what she actually did when she was in charge, and then at the end, we'll try to reach a final verdict. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, because our story doesn't begin with an empress. It begins with a young girl whose future was anything but certain. This is all about her rise from being just another concubine to becoming the emperor's most powerful confidant. Right from the get-go, Wu was different. She was born into a pretty well-off family, and her dad did something that was, almost unheard of back then. He educated her. You gotta remember, this was an era when women were expected to be quiet and decorative. But here's Wu, learning to read, write, and even debate politics. And that education, it ended up being her greatest weapon in a world designed to keep her silent. So at just 14 years old, imagine that, she's sent to the palace as a low-level concubine. But she is way too smart to stay there. Her intelligence gets her noticed, and she becomes the emperor's personal secretary, giving her a front-row seat to how power really works. But then, the emperor dies. And according to tradition, she gets banished to a Buddhist nunnery for life. Game over, right? Nope. Not for Wu. She had an ace up her sleeve, a secret, totally forbidden affair with the new emperor Gaozong, who just so happened to be her stepson. And that was her ticket back into the palace. The moment she's back, she walks right into a political snake pit. The emperor's main wife, Empress Wang, sees Wu and thinks, a new pawn I can use against my rival. Big mistake. Huge. Wu was nobody's pawn. She masterfully played them against each other, dismantling their influence piece by piece, until she was the one standing right next to the emperor. And this is where the story gets dark. Really dark. Because to secure her position and climb all the way to the top, Wu Zetian was willing to pay any price. And that price was measured in the blood of her rivals, her enemies, and maybe even her own family. So in 654, Wu gives birth to a baby girl. But not long after, the child is found dead in her crib. Wu's reaction is immediate and vicious. She accuses her #1 rival, Empress Wang, of sneaking in and murdering the baby out of pure jealousy. It was a simple, direct, and absolutely devastating accusation. But here, this is the most disturbing question of her entire life. Did Empress Wang really do it? Or, and it's chilling to even say it out loud, did Wu Zetian smother her own child, all to frame her rival and clear her path to the throne? The idea is monstrous, almost unthinkable. But for Wu, it might have just been another cold, calculated move in the game. Well, whether it was true or not, the accusation worked. Empress Wang and another rival consort were thrown in prison, stripped of all their power. But that wasn't enough for Wu. In a final, gruesome act of revenge, she ordered their hands and feet to be chopped off and then had them thrown into a giant vat of wine to drown. She supposedly sneered, "Now these two witches can get drunk to their bones." With her rivals gone, Wu became empress, and she immediately started cleaning house. This was a total purge. Any government officials who opposed her were executed. She exiled her own brothers. Even her sons weren't safe. When her eldest son started acting a little too independent, he was allegedly poisoned. When her second son became a threat, he was forced to commit suicide. For Wu, power was absolute. Okay, but here's the great paradox of Wu Zetian. This same person, who was so unbelievably ruthless, also managed one of the most stable and successful periods in the entire Tang dynasty. So, how could a tyrant also be such a fantastic leader? It's a real head-scratcher. Let's just look at the numbers for a second. Under her rule, the number of registered farming families in China almost doubled. Now, that might sound like a boring statistic, but think about what that really means. It means more food, a stable economy, and a population that isn't starving. That's the bedrock of any strong empire, and she delivered it. And her list of achievements just keeps going. She expanded the civil service exams, making it so talented people could get good jobs based on merit, not just because they came from a rich family. She cut taxes, she fought corruption, and she expanded China's borders. She even reopened the Silk Road, which was a huge deal for trade. And maybe most surprisingly, she actually improved the legal standing of women. As her husband's health got worse, her power became undeniable. They became known as the Two Saints, essentially ruling as divine equals. But Wu took it even further. She started wearing the imperial yellow robes, a color that was strictly reserved for the male emperor. It was a bold public statement that she was not just a sidekick. She was a ruler in her own right, shattering centuries of tradition. So after decades of ruling, first through her husband, then her sons, Wu finally took the throne for herself. But all reigns come to an end. Now we get to the final chapter of her life and the strange, silent puzzle she left for history to solve. In 690, she finally dropped all pretenses, forced her son to abdicate, and declared herself empress of a new dynasty. But as she got older, she grew deeply paranoid. She became more and more reliant on her young lovers, whose corruption angered the court. Finally, at age 81, a coup forced her from power. The reign of the Dragon Empress was over. She died just a few months later. Now, at her tomb, a giant stone monument was put up, just like for every other emperor. These monuments were supposed to be covered with inscriptions, listing all the ruler's amazing accomplishments for all time. But Wu Zetian's monument was left completely, utterly blank. And this is her final haunting mystery. Why the blank stone? Was it a silent confession, an admission that her crimes were too great to be written down? Or was it her ultimate act of defiance, a final message saying, "You don't get to judge me, you don't get to define my legacy," leaving it for us to argue about forever? So, what's the takeaway here? How do we even begin to understand Wu Zetian? Well, the key is that she wasn't just one thing. She was at least five. The cunning strategist, the merciless ruler, the brilliant administrator, a surprising feminist icon, and in the end, an enduring enigma. Tyrant or visionary? Maybe the only right answer is that she was both, a ruler as complex and contradictory as history itself.